While we've been, of course, enjoying the latest updates to not only heroes, but of course modes with the Year of the Rooster event and so on, there has of course been a lot of talk and speculation about who the next hero is going to be joining the Overwatch roster. Now, let's be real, there's been a lot of sort of assumptions that it's going to be Doomfist, and it's going to be voiced by Terry Crews, and it's going to be awesome. But that might not be the case, although there's definitely an argument to be made that it still is. But before we get into theories and conspiracies and tinfoil, let's go through what we actually know and what Blizzard actually said. And while they didn't say anything directly, they shared an interview late last night, at least my time it was quite late, with an Efi Oladele, or Oladele. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce that. Please do let me know. Google says Oladele, and that looks about right, but again, let me know if I'm wrong, please. Anyway, they posted an interview with this character, and obviously that sparks the assumption in a lot of people's minds going, oh, so is this a new character? I mean, Blizzard don't tend to be super overt when it comes to just announcing a character like this. I think they've learned from their mistakes of Sombra that they kind of need to announce things in a different way than they did previously. But regardless, there's definitely an argument to be made that this is the new character because, of course, there were some comments from Blizzard that the next hero would not be who we expected, and then, of course, comes this interview with Efi. Now, the interview, interestingly enough, was actually posted under the Atlas News byline, which anyone who took part or suffered in the Sombra ARG should be familiar with, and also was used for Soldier 76 as well. And the full interview, I suggest you go and read it, is rather interesting, but the most interesting part is that Efi is an 11-year-old robotics and artificial intelligence prodigy. Now, before I get into my speculations and so on about her, let's focus on the question that she was quote-unquote asked about how did you get into robots and artificial intelligence. And she says, quote, well, I've always been interested. After my mum and dad got me my first robotics kits, I became obsessed with putting together little drones. When I started getting good at it, I tried to build robots to do my chores and help around the house. My parents think it's cheating. It's no fair. I want to create things that make our lives better, and someday my dream is to build something that can keep us safe like the new OR-15s. I think that would be great. So this has led into two things. First of all, her very young age has led people to be a bit, shall we say, sceptical that she's going to be the new hero because, well, I highly doubt that Blizzard is going to have adults gunning down an 11-year-old. I just don't see that happening, and would be a bit strange, to be honest, to have that happen actually in the game. So a lot of people have been saying, oh, because she's into AI and robotics and all that, she is not going to actually be in the battle herself, but perhaps, she's going to stay in the spawn room, and then, she's going to send out her drones or her robots or whatever it happens to be onto the battlefield to do the fighting for her. Now, there's definitely an argument to be made that just sitting in the spawn room and then sending out robots to do her bidding isn't particularly interesting, but there could be another way to do it. For example, Efi could be out in the field, but perhaps there's some sort of shield or tech that she has that protects her from being damaged, but once her drone or robot or whatever it happens to be is destroyed, she would perhaps be teleported back to the spawn room, and you'd have the usual penalty that you get if you were killed, basically. That is definitely an option that I would think would be a bit more interesting than just sitting in the spawn room and then controlling a robot through a screen or whatever. And it means you get to run out on the field and obviously choose when to spawn your robots, presumably they'll be on a cooldown. I think that could be a cool way to do it, or the other way is fine too, but out of the two, I'd say the second option is personally my particular favourite. Now, before you say, oh, but, this interview with the 11-year-old Efi could be taking place in the past in the Overwatch lore, that's actually not the case. Michael Chu, who is, of course, the lead writer for Overwatch, has already confirmed that the date is real, sort of now in the Overwatch universe, so she is going to still be 11 years old, assuming, of course, that she is in the game, because, well, the more tinfoil of the people trying to, of course, dig for any nuggets of information, find clues, that sort of thing, have said that this is simply misdirection, oh my god, words, from Blizzard to distract us from Doomfist, and so Doomfist is a bit more of a surprise. Or there's even the theory that Efi and Doomfist are connected in some way, like perhaps Doomfist is like related to her or something like that. There's mention of a plane journey that Efi is taking in the interview as well, like speculation that something's going to go horribly wrong in the journey, like her parents are going to be there, so perhaps something bad happens to her parents and she builds something, uses her father's arm that's the Doomfist and all this other stuff. Like, there's a lot of possibilities with this character because there's definitely no real argument that she's not just going to be out in the field like usual hero, like Reaper or Soldier or whoever, because, well, she's 11. So there's been a lot of talk about her functioning as well, showing that she is in the field as a similar way to Abatha from Heroes of the Swarm, and that could actually be really cool. Like, I personally hope that she's actually in the game in the way that I described, or in a way similar to Abatha. That would actually be really cool, and a very sort of different way of playing compared to a lot of the heroes that we have seen so far. It sounds like she'll probably be some sort of support, potentially. Obviously, it depends like what kind of robots she can deploy. Maybe she has like support and defense abilities, but her ultimate is something a bit more offensive, or something like that. That could be really cool. There's talk that Efi's actually involved in Sombra's trailer that we saw ages ago. The conspiracy theorists and theory crafters are unsurprisingly having a field day with this, which is why I find it so interesting and why I find it so fun, to be honest with you. Now, one last thing that I want to touch on is something that she mentioned with the OR-15s. There's unsurprisingly been a lot of focus on this comment as well. I doubt this comment was made just offhandedly by Blizzard, and there was a Reddit user by the name of Hachirota88 who said, quote, Oladele is a Yoruba name. Yoruba religion calls their minor gods Orishas, or the Orisha article mentions OR-15 units. Seems like more than a coincidence to me. Now, this is definitely a valid theory, I think. Perhaps it's just going to be a visual thing, how they actually look, how they behave, or it could be a direct impact on what kind of kit she has, or more directly what kit her robot/drones have. That'd actually be really interesting, and of course that wouldn't exactly be the first time that Blizzard have kind of melded parts of the sort of characters' backstory, culture and so on into their kit, and obviously into their personality as well. But let's assume for a moment that Efi is going to be the next character, and she is just going to sit in the spawn room and control some form of robot or move around with it, but obviously be invincible until her drone is destroyed and sent back to the spawn room, as I discussed previously. Whichever way it ends up being, I don't really think there's much difference in this, in terms of how it actually plays. It's just going to be in terms of how it feels. But regardless, what role do you think she would play? And unsurprisingly, there's been a lot of people saying, well, obviously she would be a tank. She directly says in her interview that she wants to build something to keep us safe, and obviously what would keep us safer than a tank in a similar vein to Reinhardt? Now, of course, we already have 3 tanks in the game, but they all fill very different roles. D.Va is much more aggressive, Zarya is obviously a bit more of a utility, Reinhardt is the sort of pure tank in terms of the more traditional sense of the word, I suppose you could say, and you could argue that she would perhaps fill a Reinhardt-esque role, but obviously perhaps with some support and defensive abilities as well. Maybe because she'd send out her drones to scout, that sort of thing. I think tank makes sense because of what she said about keeping people safe and so on. But again, this could just be misdirection. It could be something completely different. Again, she might not even be in the game. Maybe she's just part of the lore for another character that's going to be revealed later on down the line. When it comes to revealing a hero, Blizzard aren't exactly overt, as we saw with the months and months of ARG for Sombra, which dragged on way too long. And again, there's definitely validity that her lore is just going to lead into the reveal of Doomfist, and it's just a little bit of misdirection from Blizzard to make Doomfist reveal a bit more of a surprise, and that could also be said about Jeff Kaplan's comments about how Hero 24 wasn't who we think. Blizzard aren't just going to be like, oh, you got us, yeah, it's Doomfist. Oh, shucks, guys, you figured us out. They're not going to do that, obviously. So, let me know your theories. There's going to be a link to an article I personally wrote earlier on today, as well as the full interview from Blizzard in the description below this video. Let me know your thoughts, theories, and so on. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time.